Folks, what you're watching is just some of the footage that was filmed by members of, well, people that were portraying the 83rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. This particular footage comes from members of Signal Station, 28th Massachusetts. There was a massive event this past weekend down in Virginia depicting a particular phase. Oh, you keep playing. We're just going to stop playing. You can't hear it now because I stopped sharing it. There we are. That's great. Oh, it's still playing in the background. It's so cool, though. I can hear marching and stuff, but you can't. We're already off to a great start. Welcome, everybody, to Uncut History. And what you were just watching was one of several clips that have been taken over this weekend by members of various reenacting units that came together in the wilderness, this wilderness we were talking about last week here on Uncut History, to depict a phase of that battle, particularly the phase involving the 83rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. I was planning to attend, then life into me, and I'm here at my desk, and I have to live vicariously through the video. Yeah, it's great. This is awkward. What an awkward way to open. And Ghost of Howard's Right Arm is joined in. I'm just scaring everybody. It's not fully how I was planning to start this stream. I feel like we need something more. See, I can't play my intro. It's too big to fit on the video clip, so I guess we'll just... what do we play? Do we just play this? Do we play some of this? Yeah, that's how we start the stream. All right, clean slate. Welcome, everybody, to Uncut History. Here we are continuing our coverage of the Overland Campaign, which was waged 160 years ago. The Overland Campaign being a very important phase of the American Civil War, when the Union Army of the Potomac, with a few other entities under the overall jurisdiction of Ulysses S Grant, are going to begin pursuing Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army in North Virginia. Grant's mission is to tie Lee's army down, bleed it till there's nothing left of it. And with the loss of the army in North Virginia, Grant hopes it'll mean the complete unraveling of the rebellion in the southern states. Now, last week, we talked about Grant's attempt to maneuver through a dense piece of forest called the Wilderness. His hope was to use the Wilderness to cover his movements around the right flank of the Confederate Army. And once Grant got out of the Wilderness, he would be able to find some advantageous ground south of Lee, cut Lee off from the Confederate capital of Richmond, force Lee to attack him, and annihilate the army in North Virginia. That plan did not fully work out. Robert E. Lee was very quickly aware that a massive Union presence was moving through the wilderness, and he began to send his army into the wilderness, knowing that by going into this thick forest, it would essentially take out the numerical superiority the Union soldiers had. He tried to draw Grant into isolated battles where he can defeat Grant's command in detail. However, Union forces were able to barely hold on to a vital artery called the Brock Road. And why that is so important and will be important to today's story is that the Brock Road allowed Grant to get the Union Army through the wilderness still and continue on a southerly course to outflank Lee. So again, at the end of 2 bloody days of fighting in the wilderness, Grant is still trying to get out of the wilderness, move to the south, cut Lee off of Richmond. That is his plan. Will he succeed? That is the question. And that brings us to the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And you're going to notice right away, yeah, we're going from a 2-day battle to a 2-week long battle. No pressure. So, yep, here we are, May 7th, 1864. The Battle of the Wilderness is just winding down. The Union Army, under the overall command Ulysses S. Grant, consists of the Army of the Potomac, which is under the command of George Meade, as well as the independent Ninth Corps, commanded by General Burnside. They have about 100,000 Union soldiers collectively. Robert E. Lee, on the other hand, he is down to about 52,000 Confederate soldiers. Both sides have suffered terrible losses in this 2-day fight. The difference being the Union can replace their losses. And well, for Robert E. Lee, the 2 days he tried to stall Grant in the Wilderness, they came at a very heavy price. In addition to irreplaceable losses, you're going to notice not one, but 2 of the Free Corps commanders the Army of North Virginia has must be replaced. Now, we talked about what happened to James Longstreet, which was Robert E. Lee's second in command of the whole army. He was gravely wounded in a friendly fire incident on May 6, 1864. He will be replaced by Major General Richard H. Anderson. Now, Anderson is a veteran of the American Civil War. He's been serving for he's served since the start of the war. I believe he's also a Mexican-American War veteran, so he has many years of military experience, but he's not proven in terms of Corps commander position. And you'll learn during the American Civil War that just because somebody's great commanding at one tier does not mean they're automatically good fit for a larger tier. They're not necessarily ready to take on greater responsibilities. So Anderson has something to prove while Longstreet is away. Anderson's in charge of Longstreet's third of Lee's Confederate Army. In the middle, you'll see Richard Ewell is staying around. He's actually the only face not changing in this episode in terms of Corps commanders. And over on the right, we have the Confederate Third Corps commanded by A.P. Hill. Now, Hill was not hurt in the Wilderness, but in the days after the battle, be it just the chaos that ensued those 2 days, Hill's health began to decline severely, and Hill had to take a leave of absence as these 2 armies approached Spotsylvania Courthouse. In place of Hill will be Major General Jubal Early. Early, again, similar to Anderson, has many years of experience in the Army of North Virginia, and I don't think this was the first time Early had actually been called up to take a larger command, but I can't put my finger on when. Maybe this was the first time he actually had to be a Corps commander. So, a lot of faces changed in the Army of North Virginia, and Lee really can't afford this to happen right now. Not only is he bleeding soldiers, the only thing that was really keeping everything together was solid leadership. And now that leadership is starting to fall apart on all sides. So hopefully Lee hopes this is going to be the worst of his changes. Another big issue facing Robert E. Lee. He is still in the Wilderness, which is on fire. He is in a burning forest. He got to get his men out of that burning forest. And he has to make up twice the distance in order to cut off Grant from taking Spotsylvania Courthouse. And here short, we'll explain why Spotsylvania Courthouse is so important to the American Civil War. Now let's take a look at over what's happening with the Army of the Potomac and the Union Army. They got their own troubles. They're sore from the Wilderness. I mean, they're going to get reinforcements. Grant is starting to tap all of the major fortifications up north to start sending their heavy artillery units to replenish his losses, but that's going to take time for them to get to the front lines. Also, trying to move forward, trying to move after these terrible losses. Well, when you're trying to move 100,000 men on one road, that being the Brock Road, you're going to create a choke point. So there's a lot of congestion building up on the Brock Road as Grant's trying to get the Union troops moving, and that's going to impede their speed in trying to get the Spotsylvania Courthouse. The Army of the Potomac is also suffering from what Grant and many other people have called the slows. No, this isn't like the bends. This isn't an actual illness. The slows means the commanders in the Army of the Potomac, as well as other Union commanders in Eastern Theater, have this tendency to go fight one big battle and really, really not want to pursue thereafter. They can get pretty gun shy pretty quickly. And who can blame them? I mean, we saw the madness that happened in the wilderness. They don't want to just go right back into the meat grinder. So there's definite hesitation amongst the Corps commanders. But up to this point in the Eastern Theater of the American Civil War, and for those that are not familiar with the terminology, Eastern Theater, we're talking about the battles between Richmond and Washington, D.C., as well as going north up to the Battle of Gettysburg. Every time Robert E. Lee gives the Army of the Potomac a whipping, that commander runs away. They'll go in, fight Lee, get defeated, run away. Or even just at the very least, they just got bludgeoned by Lee. May not have been a victory, but they got bludgeoned. They run away. That happened with George B. McClellan in 1862. That happened with General Burnside in late 1862. That happened with Joseph Hooker in 1863 at the Battle of Chancellorsville. And that kind of happened with Meade as well. Now, I defend Meade for not pursuing Lee aggressively after the Battle of Gettysburg, as the Army of the Potomac was ravaged. I mean, 2 of the Union Corps were completely wiped out from that one battle. But that did not sit well with politicians, including the Lincoln administration, that Meade had gained this one, for the first time ever, the Army of the Potomac is decisively victorious over the Army of Northern Virginia, and Meade did not pursue. So people, including Grant, are now starting to perceive Meade and all of his corps commanders suffering from the slows. And this is going to bring General Meade into fierce conflict with a guy by the name of Philip Sheridan. Philip Sheridan is a controversial figure of the American Civil War, to say the least. In the late 19th century, especially through the 20th century, everybody idolized Sheridan. He was the greatest cavalry commander to ever exist, not counting General Jeb Stuart. And he was also the greatest infantry general, because he later would actually command infantry. He would end up commanding whole armies. He bounces all around the different branches of the military during the American Civil War. He's a jack of all trades. He can do no wrong. He is also a really, really good politician. Sheridan is great at hyping himself up. And that's something you should always remember about Phil Sheridan, that he was very good at presenting himself to the general public, which made the general public really like him. It also made him very, very irksome to be around if you're one of his peers, in this case being Meade, and Meade's actually not just his peer. Meade is technically Sheridan's superior. Meade wants Sheridan to use the Union cavalry to screen their advance south towards Spotsylvania Courthouse. And this is traditionally how cavalry was used in the 18th and 19th century. They were used as scouting forces, small scale. They were attached to a short leash to the main infantry fighting force. They were the eyes and the ears of the infantry and the artillery. If you don't have cavalry, you're not really going to know where you're going. Sheridan, on the other hand, really does not like being held down on a leash. He is used to being back over in the Western Theater, so up around the Mississippi River and being fighting in Tennessee, being allowed by Grant really to just go off and do his own thing. Go off and tear up holy hell in the rear of the enemy forces. Really, Grant really didn't care too much for the cavalry. He's like, yeah, you go off, do that thing. You're more useful off by yourselves. So we're at an impasse. Meade has one way he wants to use the cavalry. Sheridan wants to do something completely different. I want to double check so I'm not jumping ahead of my story. So what's going to end up happening is Sheridan is going to send some forces to screen Meade's approach. And when I say Meade, I'm talking the whole Army of the Potomac. And I must pause because Wrangler has gifted me a $10. Very appreciative. And of course, the 420. Thank you very much, Wrangler, for tuning in on this evening as we talk about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, one of the most savage fights of the American Civil War. So, Sheridan on May 7th, 1864, is going to start sending Union cavalry down the Brock Road to screen the advance of the Army of the Potomac, begrudgingly. He's like, all right, I'll stick to the road. The whole force is on fire anyway, so I don't want to go too far from the path. He is going to end up skirmishing with Confederate cavalry at a place known as Todd's Tavern on May the 7th. And after this day fight, Sheridan decides to bivouac camp right in the middle of the Brock Road. Now, I think part of the reason he did this is, again, because of the whole forest being on fire thing. And we'll talk about a little bit later why I think this is why he does it, because certain other people are going to hesitate camping in the wilderness the night of May 7th. So Sheridan camps right in the middle of the Brock Road. When General Gouverneur K. Warren of the Union 5th Corps starts approaching down the Brock Road to Todd Tavern, he's frustrated to find, I can't go any further south. My advance is blocked because the cavalry's just sitting there and sleeping. So Warren writes up to Meade, hey, get Sheridan off the road. We need to keep going to Spotsylvania. So Meade's going to tell Sheridan, get over here. Get over here. And he chews out Sheridan right in front of Grant at Todd's Tavern. Again, there's another hilarious episode where Grant is just watching everything fall apart in the Army of the Potomac in terms of leadership. And Meade, who's known affectionately as Snapping Turtle by some of his soldiers, cusses out Sheridan's like, what the heck are you doing? You're sleeping on the road. You can't block the infantry. This is the only way to move to Spotsylvania. We got to get in Lee's rear. And Sheridan's just like, I've had enough of this. Looks over at Grant and, for lack of a better term, is like, why the heck did you bring me east? Couldn't you just leave me back west? Now I got to deal with all these freaking losers. And, Meade's just getting really, really unnervy. And I'm being hyperbolic, of course, guys. This is not what was really being said, but I'm trying to get the rough feelings across. And eventually Sheridan tells Grant, I want to go detach me like you usually detach me. I will go deal with the Confederate cavalry elsewhere. I will go threaten Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital. I can move far quicker than these infantry forces can. I'm going to go down and threaten Richmond, and that means the Confederate cavalry's prize commander, Jeb Stuart, he's going to have to come out and fight me. He is going to have to come out and stop me from going to Richmond. And I'm going to meet him in some great bloody battle and prove to the world who's a superior cavalry commander. And that also means that the Confederate cavalry may be withdrawn from this battlefront, if I'm making any sense. Sheridan wants to detach from the Army of the Potomac, go toward Richmond to go fight a big battle of Jeb Stuart to prove who's the superior of cavalry commanders in this war. Meade says, absolutely not. I need you to keep screening my forces south. Grant approves Sheridan. And in this maneuver, I would say this is the moment Grant officially takes charge of the Army of the Potomac. I mentioned earlier we were kind of talking more about General Meade being in charge of the Battle of Wilderness. Grant was kind of more just watching to see how the Army of the Potomac functions and was there to push Burnside in whenever he was needed. This is the moment where Grant goes, oh yeah, you know how I told you, Meade, that you're going to have complete control of the Army still? I was just going to advise you on a few details. I'm just going to be administration. Yeah, no, Sheridan, you can do whatever you want to do. Go ride south. And Sheridan goes, whee! He rides off. We'll talk about that later on. And Meade is just like, then I'm useless. So Meade is none too enthused. Well, we get to May 8th. Governor K. Warren is now able to move since Sheridan's not blocking the road anymore because he's off having his joy ride down to Richmond. Warren is going to advance to the south to a spot known as Laurel Hill. Laurel Hill is the last rise of ground between the Union and Confederate armies and Spotsylvania Courthouse. Whoever gets this spot is going to have control of the crossroads of the courthouse. And that is why Spotsylvania Courthouse is so important. The Brock Road is going to intersect with a number of roads, and you have a number of approaches to choose from to attack Richmond, or also to get supplies for the Union, get supplies funneled in down to Spotsylvania. So Spotsylvania is a very, very important intersection of roadways for both sides in this conflict. Well, the 5th Corps is going to advance. They see on Laurel Hill what appears to be some Confederate cavalry. Jeb Stuart has deployed them up here. They figure we can just charge right through them. Well, when they get to the top of Laurel Hill, they realize it's not just Confederate cavalry. It's also elements of Richard's 1st Confederate Corps, or Anderson's 1st Union Corps. Man, I'm so not used to talking about Richard Anderson. I'm so used to talking about James Longstreet. You probably can assume Robert E. Lee went through a situation similar to this at this time period. So Richard Anderson has maneuvered in front of the Union Army. wait a minute, how the heck did Confederate infantry show up on Laurel Hill before the Union? Didn't the Confederates have twice the distance to cover? Well, remember the detail about the wilderness being on fire on May 7th? I remember the detail I mentioned about, I think I know why Sheridan did not want to bivouac anywhere except the road. On the night of May 7th, Richard Anderson, who had just taken charge of this massive corps, one of the most important elements of Lee's Confederate Army in Northern Virginia, decides camping here in the wilderness is too dangerous. It's on fire. We're just going to keep marching for the night until we find some safer ground. So he just kept moving south and further south, and they found some circuitous roads that would allow them to get to Spotsylvania Courthouse going south and then cutting over east. So they did take the longer route, but since they chose not to sleep, they just kept going straight and got to Laurel Hill early on the morning of May 8th, just in time to reinforce Jeb Stuart on top of it. Robert E. Lee, therefore, has control of the crossroads of Spotsylvania Courthouse. So you can imagine how Grant is going to feel about this. And this is why I put a poll in the chat right now asking you guys, did Grant make the right decision in allowing Sheridan to ride off on his own to go attack Richmond? Now, I will say this, wait a little bit longer to vote, because there's going to be some things that are going to play out in the coming days involving Sheridan. Just because he's not at Spotsylvania doesn't mean he's not important to Spotsylvania. All right, back to our story. And there we are. So, Union forces on May 8th tried to assault Anderson's Confederate line on Laurel Hill. However, and you'll see an image here. Actually, I'll just pivot over right now. Here is a Google Map image of Laurel Hill today. We are looking from the perspective of the Union Army looking toward Laurel Hill. So the Confederates would have been entrenched up on top of that ground. After several frontal assaults made by the Union 5th Corps, which were rather piecemeal, Warren decides to give up, and he decides to dig in his own corps on the opposite side of this field. So, Warren and Anderson are stared across each other on both sides of Laurel Hill. And in the late evening of May 8th, John Sedgwick with his 6th Union Corps is going to show up to the left of Warren, and they too are going to begin to dig in near Laurel Hill. All right. Now, we got 2 Union Corps on the field by the night of May 8th. They have dug in on either side of the Brock Road. The Union forces are facing toward the southeast, facing down the Brock Road towards Spotsylvania Courthouse, which lays a few miles ahead. They're going to start digging out on both sides. So they're going to start digging to their right and start to their left, and they're going to start poking and prodding to try to figure out how far does the Confederate line actually go? Does it go to the west? Does it go to the east? What are we looking at here? Because we don't have cavalry to tell us what's ahead. Anyways, you can tell I'm a little biased about the Sheridan situation. Anyways, so by the May 9th, the 2nd Corps, commanded by Winfield Scott Hancock, has also arrived to reinforce. And coming from the northeast, completely separate from the Army of the Potomac, coming in a whole different direction, is also coming the 9th Corps of Ambrose Burnside. So you have these 2 disconnected Union lines forming outside of Spotsylvania Courthouse. A larger one to the northwest along Laurel Hill, and a smaller one forming to the northeast along the Fredericksburg Road. Robert E. Lee is going to be moving the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia into position. He's taking them longer routes to the west of the Union Army, but he's able to bypass the Union Army, get his men through Spotsylvania Courthouse, and start fanning out the troops. Now, on May 9th, there's going to be a lot of poking and prodding by both sides to try to gauge what's the force like. One of the folks that are poking and prodding is John Sedgwick of the Union 6th Corps. Now, John Sedgwick could be a little bit of a controversial figure. On one hand, Grant and several others higher-ups were not too impressed by Sedgwick during the war. They felt he suffered from the slows, that he was very gun shy. But on the other hand, hey, when you have a corps commander that's gun shy and you're a private in the Union Army, that's great. I'd have a less likely chance of getting myself killed. So you're going to be pretty fond with the privates in the Army, not so much your politicians back in DC. And that was the case with John Sedgwick. he was pretty well respected by most of the soldiers. And to give you an idea how much he was pretty, I want to say he was nonchalant with the foot soldiers, but how much he could relate to the Union soldiers. On the morning of May 9th, he was actually out patrolling the Sixth Corps front lines, seeing how the earthworks were being constructed, see what did they see ahead of them. And he noticed that a lot of his soldiers were cowering behind the earthwork. They're down there digging, throwing as much dirt as possible between me and the Confederates. And Sedgwick comes up like, guys, calm down. Come on, calm down. They're all the way over there. And he says they could have hit an elephant from this vantage. Well, a few seconds later, a Confederate sharpshooter got his sights on John Sedgwick, realized that it was a major general of the Union Army that was very close to his gun, fired, and a mini ball went right underneath Sedgwick's eye, killing him instantly. John Sedgwick is considered the highest ranking Union officer to be killed during the American Civil War. He didn't die in some big battle, some big attack. He died simply while reviewing his troops. And when Grant heard this, though he had been a little critical of Sedgwick's performance on the battlefield a few days prior, he will say that no greater loss than a whole division of troops. That losing him was worse than losing a whole portion of the army. And that's going to kind of set the tempo of what's to come here at Spotsylvania. So we have already had the highest ranking Union officer killed on May 9th, the second day of the fight in Spotsylvania. It's going to get worse, guys. How worse? Discuss that in the chat. Now, earlier in the stream, I did say A.S. Burnett popped in, and thank you for tuning in. Ask me, have you done any videos on the Lee family? I have not. That may be a topic for a future discussion. Well, by the night of May 9th, going into May 10th, this is kind of what the battle lines are looking like. And now you can see that network of roads I'm talking about. It's not simply one intersection. It's not like a crossroads like in the wilderness. This is a web of different intersections that are near Spotsylvania Courthouse. And Spotsylvania Courthouse itself is not all that important, the actual village. I mean, it's really just a cluster of buildings around the county courthouse. That's really the big significance of it. It's the road network. And Lee is trying to protect that road network. If Grant gets a foothold on this road network, he'll have a myriad of options on directly marching toward Richmond, Virginia. Lee don't want that. That's bad news for the Confederacy at this point. So, throughout May 9th, Grant, as I mentioned, is ordering these poking and prodding maneuvers. You can see off to the Union, on the very western side of the Union line, you see Hancock, the Union Second Corps. He is going to make a probe to the south. He is going to get a place known as a Blockhouse Bridge, where he'll meet stiff resistance from two Confederate divisions, parts of, I want to say it's Early's Corps. I think it was parts of Early's Corps that were rushed in along the Po River. And Grant quickly realized, okay, Lee got a really strong left flank. Can't attack on the Po River. Can't do that. We'll have to see what his right flank is right. And well, I want you to direct your attention to the center of the screen. What is initially Lee's right flank, but as he keeps extending the battle lines, will now become his center. Notice that bulge in the middle of the Confederate line. We call that in military terms a salient. Salients are not a good position to be in if you're the defender, because a salient, which is just basically one big circle in your line, a big bulge, means you can be subjected to crossfire. You can be fired on multiple sides at the same point. Not really good if you're the defender. Now, there is a reason why salients form during battles, because if this is a bad engineering choice, why the heck would commanders lay their armies out in salients? Topography. There is a ridge line. It's not really prominent, but there is a ridge line running north of Spotsylvania Courthouse. That's where we get Laurel Hill from, where the first day's fighting occurred. From Laurel Hill heading east, the Confederate engineers advised Lee to build a series of earthworks, but that hillside, unfortunately, has a nice loop in it. And so they designed a salient around it. Now, why doesn't Robert E. Lee just contract his line? Why does it just make it a straight line? You can see he has an interior line with John B. Gordon, who, by the way, has been promoted to divisional commander by this point, went from brigade to division. You can see Gordon has an interior line. Why not make that straight line the front line? Well, you don't want the enemy to get on this plateau and be eye to eye to you. You want to be overlooking the enemy. So any high ground, no matter how small, is very important. Hence why this salient forms, particularly involving the men of Richard Ewell's 2nd Confederate Corps. And the soldiers of both sides will start dubbing this salient the Mule Shoe, which is how I'm going to keep calling it for the rest of the video. So you see where Ewell's name is? See how you have that big bend? That is the Mule Shoe. And man, does it make a very tempting target for Grant. But how is Grant going to approach it? And here are some photographs showing you examples of earthworks. The one to the left is not actually a photograph of the Spotsylvania Mule Shoe, but it does give you an idea how these earthworks are being built. Now, I used the term breastworks when we were at the wilderness, when we're talking about the wilderness, which was really just piles of limbs and dirt hastily thrown together to make a crude pile to protect a soldier up to their shoulders. It washes away in a few days from the rain. These are a bit more complex. These earthworks have not only, you see a stack of logs to the left image. That's pretty much what the earthworks in the Mule Shoe look like. A straight pile of logs, sometimes with some cribbing, some support beams. You're throwing all the dirt from your side of the wall to the enemy side of the wall to give you as much absorption of enemy projectiles as possible. It also means you're digging down into the ground, and now you got yourself a proper trench. So in some cases, the Mule Shoe is deep enough that these guys are completely covered. The Confederate soldiers are completely covered from Union vantage positions. Notice how this campaign progresses. The earthworks get more and more complex. Now, the image to the right actually is an image of some earthworks, not at the Mule Shoe, but at Laurel Hill, because we should not forget that just because the main fight in Laurel Hill on May 8th, there's going to be more actions there, and the Confederates are going to put in front of their trenches what we call abattis. And that's what you see in that image. All it is really, it's sharpened stakes. You just sharp the end off of a stake, and now you got a very, very, very pointy thing. Abattis, it's 19th century barbed wire. And yes, for those that are students of the Great War, I'm sure these images are going to start looking less and less like the American Civil War and more like the Great War, especially with the trenches. Then something also to mention is in that Mule Shoe formation that Ewell has made, he has entrenched 2 houses, and at least one of them is occupied. So it's important to remember when we talk about these battles, these are happening not just in remote locations. It may be farm fields, but there are people who live on farms and tend to these farms, and these farms are their way of life. And when these 150,000 soldiers move on to these farms and these great battles, they are obliterating the way of life of these people. Off to the left, you'll see an image of the McCall House, or the McCool House. I haven't fully figured out how they pronounce that. I'm sure somebody will correct me in the chat below. The McCool House was owned by Neil McCool, who lived with his 4 unmarried sisters and several slaves that were owned by him. Neil himself was absent during the fighting. However, his 4 sisters were there and sought shelter in the basement. I really like to know why Neil was absent. You left your sisters defenseless. Please tell me there's more to the story other than that you're like, I'm not defending them. I'm too scared. I'm running away. And off to the right, you have the Harrison House. The Harrison House was the home of Edgar and Ann Harris, who raised 3 young children on the farm. And Harris was a little bit better off than the average farmer in the Spotsylvania area. He actually owned 11 slaves at the time of the battle. And Edgar, at the start of the war, had actually enlisted with Confederate cavalry. And I don't know if he was actually on the Spotsylvania battlefield, but he's definitely serving in the area. He's serving with the Army of North Virginia. So that's something to keep in mind. His house is under threat of attack while he is serving for the Army of North Virginia. That got to be an interesting position to be in. But here we are, May 10th. And as I asked earlier, how is Grant going to approach this rather intricate defense system that Lee is throwing together? Well, it is Grant's idea that at 5 p.m. on May the 10th, he will make a general offensive on the entire Confederate line. This is going to consist of the Union 5th Corps attacking on Laurel Hill once more, putting severe pressure on Anderson's corps. It is also going to call for Burnside to make an advance on the Confederate right wing held by Early's corps. And that'll mean Burnside's actually approaching directly toward the titular Spotsylvania Courthouse. There's one other portion to the strategy. It may actually be the key portion. It is the attack on the center, the Union attack on the Muleshoe. Well, instead of forming a line of battle and marching like Napoleonic style over these farm fields, over the McCall and Harrison's farm fields to attack Ewell, Grant is going to decide upon a different strategy. Now, there are disputes over who suggested this strategy. It seems to be one of his engineers. Noted there's a spot in art where the Confederate line is only 200 yards away from a tree line. We can gun that. We can run it like a relay. And the Confederates won't know what hits them. We'll be not only on top of their earthworks, we'll be inside their earthworks. And maybe, just maybe, this sudden shock and awe approach to assaulting will lead to the Confederate center imploding and give us a road right to Richmond. Ultimately, the person tasked with leading this interesting attack is going to be a guy by the name of Emory Upton. A little about Emory Upton. He's arrogant, but he is courageous. Fierce abolitionist who graduated from West Point class of 1861, right when the American Civil War had commenced. And ultimately, spoiler alert, he will survive the Battle of Spotsylvania. He will ultimately go on to command in all three branches of the U.S. Army during the war. So he's commanding in the infantry at this time. He started his military career, however, with the artillery, and he will end his career in command of a cavalry unit. So all three major portions of a U.S. Army force in the Civil War, he gets command. One of the few guys get to do that. So jack of all trades. Kind of like that Phil Sheridan dude. Phil Sheridan. How you doing that in Richmond, by the way? We'll get to you tomorrow. So eventually transferred from artillery over to infantry and was put in colonel of the 121st New York. An interesting detail. The 121st New York, back in May of 1863, participated in an attack by the Union 6th Corps on Marye's Heights. Does that name sound familiar, guys? Marye's Heights was the high ground that Robert E. Lee put his soldiers on in December of 1862 during the brutal Battle of Fredericksburg, where Burnside essentially left his whole right wing, throwed himself piecemeal at Confederate forces behind stone walls. It did not go well for the Union. However, in May of 1863, when Joseph Hooker was trying to get behind Lee's army, attacking him at Chancellorsville, Hooker also called for a demonstration, which meant to distract elements of Lee's force on top of Marye's Heights outside of Fredericksburg. Well, the 6th Corps decided, what happens if we not march toward Marye's Heights? We gun it to Marye's Heights. To hell with the bullets, they're going to be cutting us down. If we move fast enough, if we run quicker than the bullets, maybe, just maybe, we can break Marye's Heights. So Upton was one of the men leading regiments in this blitz up Marye's Heights. And though it was a brutal assault, it worked. Punching multiple holes, kind of like javelins being thrown into a target, cutting apart the Confederate defenses on Marye's Heights. I don't think it's no coincidence that Upton was chosen to command a very similar attack on May 10th, 1864 here at Spotsylvania. He had experience doing it. And by this point, the Union 6th Corps had unintentionally become the Special Operations Force for the Army of the Potomac. If there's a unique strategy they want to test out, the 6th Corps are usually the guys asked to do it. Even though, for the most part, the 6th Corps really haven't been involved in force in the American Civil War. So, interesting detail. All right, back to our story. So, Upton is put in charge of an ad hoc unit of about 4,500 soldiers. And I think he has about like 12 regiments under his command, I want to say. And his instructions are charge toward the earthworks. I know that sounds crazy, but it's crazy enough. It may just work. And Upton's idea is his force will act very similar to the phalanx maneuver we hear about during the days of the Greeks and the Romans, where you'll put your guys in a very narrow column, but if you guys get enough momentum at the same time, you're going to charge right through the enemy line. So this is nothing new that Upton's about to try. It's nothing new that Grant is theorizing. It's a very ancient strategy, but given some modern pizzazz, storming trenches and give it some modern pizzazz. No big lines marching in grand unison. This is a very narrow but very powerful punch to pierce through the enemy line in one position. Now, Upton's also told he will be supported by a division of the Union 2nd Corps. They're going to attack the Muleshoe from the north, kind of distract Ewell, try to draw his gunfire away. So Ewell's looking north, not looking to his west, where Upton's about to burst out of the woodwork. However, this does not fully work out. Grant decides midday that Upton's going to need some artillery to support his attack. He's going to detach 18 pieces, but to give him enough time, tells Upton, delay your attack till about 6:30. That change in timetable doesn't get communicated to the rest of the Army of the Potomac. Warren starts attacking Laurel Hill midday around 3 o'clock. By the time Warren's attack is over, Upton still has not made his attack yet. Mott, who's commanding that division from the 2nd Corps, he thinks we're still a go at 5 p.m. So at 5 p.m., he starts emerging from the forest, and it's kind of like the meme from Simpsons when what's the name of the grandfather? The grandfather, walks in, takes his hat off, then puts his hat back on and leaves. That was Mott's contribution on May 10th. He walks out of the woods. Oh, we weren't supposed to go yet. My bad, guys. Walks back, and we don't see him the rest of the day. So it's all down to Upton. At 6 p.m., there will be an artillery barrage on a bulge in the Muleshoe known as Dole Salient, held by Georgians under the command of General Dole. And those Georgians probably have an idea something's coming their way. They're still not prepared for how quickly the Union are going to move. And off to the left is a map in detail showing you Upton's column bursting out of the tree line just 200 yards west of Dole Salient. They're going to charge forward, and as one Confederate soldier later claims, the Yankees fought with unusual desperation, and where the artillery was, they contended as stubbornly as if it was their own pieces. Upton's men are going to endure 2 vicious volleys, but they're able to move quick enough to jump over the earthworks, down into the trenches, and they're going to start pouring into the heart of the Muleshoe. The Confederates are absolutely flabbergasted at what's happening. Upton has an initial great success, rounds up hundreds of prisoners. His men start fanning off to the north, fanning off to the south, continuing east to try to gain advantages. The problem is the reinforcements from Mott aren't there. Because Mott, he's done his performance for the day. He's just hanging out in the tree line like, okay, I guess we aborted. Hey, what's Upton doing? Oh, am I supposed to go out now? But we already, did our thing. We're going to stay here in the tree line. Upton is unsupported. And very quickly, Richard Ewell is going to get reports that there has been a breach in the Muleshoe. He's going to ride forward, personally rallying whatever men he can find, order them plug that gap, and all these Confederate soldiers, including the Stonewall Brigade, are going to swarm in to patch up this gap. And within a half hour, 45 minutes, Upton's men tenaciously are trying to hold on to the breach. They don't want to let go, but Upton starts realizing he is running out of ammunition. His 4th wave ran in prematurely with the 3rd wave, so there's no more soldiers to pour into the pocket, and he's going to have to quit the field. And there's a Union soldier that reportedly starts shouting, "We don't want to go. Send us ammunition and rations. We can stay here for 6 months," trying to plead Upton to send to his superiors, "Please send reinforcements." But Upton will begrudgingly call off the attack. He'll pull his men out of Dole salient and back to the tree line. This was a frantic attack. Everybody's adrenaline got up and pumping. And there were severe losses. I want to say it was at least about 1,000 of Upton's men were casualties as a result of this. So that's about a quarter of the command he had. And Upton was devastated. He's broken down, crying, hysterical. He was upset that all these men had died for nothing. But Grant eventually tells Upton, don't worry, you did not fail. It's our fault that we did not reinforce you. We're going to use this strategy again. What you needed was far more men to achieve it. And these are some images of the scene of Upton's charge today. Of course, you won't see any prominent examples of earthworks, though they're in the brush. They are there. There's humps left still of the Confederate earthworks on Dole salient. The top image is showing you the Confederate perspective, looking to the tree line. Told you that's a close tree line. That's not even 200 yards. That's like 150 yards, if that. So from that tree line on the top image is where Upton burst out of the woods, stormed the salient, and in the bottom image is showing you what Upton in the Union perspective would have been once they got into the earthworks, looking west, looking to the other side of the mule shoe. And Lieutenant Bob has tuned in. I told my dad you were streaming. He not only knew it already, he knew it was the anniversary tomorrow. You guys are two peas in a pod. Oh, yes. And today is actually the anniversary, 160 years ago today, that John Sedgwick was killed. So that when we talked about that sniper earlier shooting him, highest ranking Union officer killed, happened 160 years ago today. Well, Grant is going to start planning a larger attack on the mule shoe, but in the meantime, what's Phil Sheridan up to? Well, Phil Sheridan has run off down to Richmond. And his plan, he knew he wasn't getting to Richmond. He knew that. He wasn't that crazy. What he wanted to do was entice Jeb Stuart, the famed cavalry commander, to come out of Spotsylvania and engage him in a big battle. It's east meets west. And then you can, in the Burning Hearts, you can start playing a Survivor song. What do you guys think? Do you think Burning Hearts is superior to Eye of the Tiger? Let me know in the comment section below. Anyways, on May 11th, 1864, at a crossroads northwest of Richmond known as the Yellow Tavern, Sheridan's men are going to charge right into Jeb Stuart's men, which Sheridan's intention was, the reason he wanted the whole of the cavalry of the Army of the Potomac, because he wanted to throw as much men as he got to smash into Jeb Stuart, overwhelm the Confederates, shock them, terrify them. Though the Confederates are going to hold desperately to the crossroads, vicious fighting is going to ensue. And at the end of it, Jeb Stuart is mortally wounded and will die a few days later. That is right. The Army of Northern Virginia Cavalry Corps commander is now dead. Another Corps commander Lee has lost. And this one is really going to hurt Lee. Jeb Stuart was an idol for the Confederacy. Even in 1864, he was already some type of mythologized hero. Personally, I think Jeb Stuart's overrated. He rode up north and got his name in the paper. Where was he during Gettysburg? I know where he was. He was out in the rear of the Union Army fighting George Armstrong Custer in the East Cavalry field action, which I do have a retracing history video on. So if you've not had the chance to see that, look up East Cavalry Field after this video on my channel, and you can learn all the wonders of Jeb Stuart. So Jeb Stuart is dead. This is going to greatly upset Lee. He's going to have to find another replacement, another Corps commander replacement. So he's now had to replace not one, not two, but 3 Corps commanders by the time he's there at Spotsylvania Courthouse. It is a nightmare in the leadership of Army Northern Virginia. Meanwhile, Grant is starting to put his larger attack on the mule shoe into motion. He is going to move Hancock's 2nd Corps from being the right flank of the Union line. He's going to move them from the west, from Laurel Hill. He's going to move them behind the 6th Corps, and he's going to redeploy them on the west flank. On the Union's man, it's so confusing because I'm looking at a compass. Now I have to think like the Union. He's redeploying them on the east flank of the Union line. He's deploying them in the woods north of the Muleshoe. It'll make a lot more sense when I got a map, guys, I promise. Now, Lee's getting reports that there's a massive Union presence moving behind the front line. Lee interprets this as Grant preparing to retreat back to Fredericksburg. This is one of the most questionable decisions Lee comes to. I don't get what Lee was thinking. The only thing I can theorize, because I've been going around this all day, I'm like, why would Lee think, after the 2-day fight in the wilderness, that Grant has continued moving south? He has proven he wants to fight. He is committed to this front line. Why would he now think, oh yeah, after Laurel Hill and Upton's assault, yeah, Grant's done. He's fallen back. He's no different than the other commanders. I think it's because Lee has a very different interpretation of the fighting of the wilderness than historians do today. We saw the wilderness as a 2-day firefight. Then it goes into the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. We treat this as separate stories. I don't think Lee realizes wilderness is over yet. I think he's still believing that he's fighting the Battle of the Wilderness. The reason I'm saying this is, May 5th, Lee surprises Grant. May 6th, Lee almost breaks through the Brock Road intersection, but Grant sends enough reinforcements to hold him back. On May 7th, Lee is going to hold back parts of Grant's army, Todd Tavern, and then later on May 8th at Laurel Hill. I think once these lines fanned out, he thought, oh, I've reached stalemate. That's it. It's done. So, I don't know. I'm not explaining this right, but I think Lee greatly misinterpreted how the Battle of the Wilderness ended and where Spotsylvania started. No, we've broken off from the wilderness. We're in a whole new ball game now. We're extending these lines as far as they'll go east. That's Grant's idea, where Lee is like, oh, well, I held him in the wilderness. I checked him again on Laurel Hill, and now he's starting to move to the northeast. Must be retreating. And after all, every previous Union Army general that faced Robert E. Lee in a battle, after Lee beat him, for lack of better terms, after Lee would beat them, they would withdraw back across the rivers and go back to D.C. So, for whatever reason, Lee thinks Grant is the same as his predecessors, even though we have evidence from the wilderness, and so far in this video, he is not. He is not giving up. So Hancock is moving his Second Corps to the eastern flank of the Union line. They're obscured by the trees. They're also doing this movement in the evening as dusk is settling on the battlefield. And also a torrential rainstorm starts pouring over the soldiers. So rain is starting to come down the night of May 10th, or night of May 11th, going into May 12th. At this time, because Lee thinks Grant is evacuating from Spotsylvania, Lee orders for the artillery that he's given to Richard Ewell to be withdrawn from the Muleshoe. Now, Richard Ewell told Lee earlier in the battle, I don't like this position. I don't like being in a salient, but if you give me enough artillery, I got this covered. Now he's taking the one advantage Ewell had from the Muleshoe. Why the heck is he making it weaker? Lee, thinking Grant is about to move to Fredericksburg, is not about to allow the Union Army to slip out of his fingers again. He wants to seek a war ender just like Grant wants to here at Spotsylvania. So he's like, I need to get my artillery out of the Muleshoe, out of this muck that's being created by the rain, get it to the rear of my army, close to a roadway. So when I get word that Grant's moving to Fredericksburg, I can start running this artillery up a road to Fredericksburg to attack him. So he's trying to withdraw. He's trying to think ahead, essentially. This removal of artillery, however, is going to greatly unnerve the divisional commander who is at the front, the very tip of the Muleshoe, and that's Major General Edward Johnson, sometimes called Allegheny Johnson. And on to the right, you're going to see a photograph taken by Alex Zirkle, who was a participant in the 140th anniversary reenactment of the Battle of Spotsylvania, where they actually reconstructed a portion of the Muleshoe. So you get a pretty good idea what this Muleshoe looks like. Like I said, it's a proper trench. It's a proper trench. And Johnson's up there. He's at the head of the muleshoe, looking north to the tree line, and he can hear troops moving, and they're not moving away. The sound is increasing of more men marching in the mud in the tree line. He's hearing horses yearning. He's hearing wagon wheels churning. He's hearing more and more voices of Union soldiers. He knows something's about to happen to his division. And he don't like that Robert E. Lee is taking his artillery from him. So Johnson's going to go up, yell at Ewell, what the heck are you doing? Do you not see what's happening to our front? We're about to be attacked, and you're moving artillery now in the dead of night? Ewell tries to explain to him, well, Robert E. Lee thinks they're retreating, and Johnson's like, they're not retreating. I can hear them. They're coming for me. So Ewell goes over to Lee and says, hey, I got a divisional commander that's saying that you may be wrong. And Lee's like, you sure about this? Yes, yeah, I trust Johnson. So Ewell convinces Lee to redeploy the artillery back to the muleshoe. But that's going to take several hours. It's going to take several hours to move all that artillery back in position in even muddier conditions now as we get to the early morning hours of May 12th, 1864. And I want to just look at this image for a moment. I mean, this is just one of the most badass images of the American Civil War. You are looking at the chain of command for the Union Army Second Corps. Now, seated in the middle is the Corps commander, Winfield Scott Hancock, arguably the best Corps commander in the Army of the Potomac at this point in the campaign. As we mentioned, Grant does not have too high of opinion of the other Corps commanders. He thinks they suffer from the slows. Hancock, on the other hand, has time and time over the years proven that he is a capable leader. He can take charge of whole armies in clutch situations. And the Second Corps, that the men that he command are some of the veterans of the Army of the Potomac. They've been with it since the very beginning. These are very experienced officers that have made their way through the ranks. Off to your left is Francis Barlow, though not really liked by his men due to his very white collar background. And he also was he could be a little bit of a prick. Barlow could be a bit of a prick toward the lower echelons of the army. But time and time again, Barlow had suffered grave wounds, had been through the roughest, the toughest. I would say his white collar has been turned blue, but it's definitely been stained during the American Civil War. So Barlow, while people may not like him, you have to respect the man by this point in 1864. He also loved the checkered shirt he has on. Again, just looks awesome. Off to the right, you're going to have John Gibbon. John Gibbon's most famous for being one of the original commanders of the famed Iron Brigade, one of the toughest brigades in the Army of the Potomac back in 1862 and obliterated in 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg. Gibbon is now moved up to divisional command, and the middle is General Birney. General Birney is not from the Second Corps originally. He's actually from the Third Corps. He is what's left of the old Third Corps after Dan the Man Sickles decided to move his whole Third Corps 3/4 of a mile forward to save George Meade at the Battle of Gettysburg, or so Dan Sickles would want you to believe it. After that Battle of Gettysburg, we talked about this in the Wilderness, the First and Third Corps were essentially dissolved and their troops were put into other corps. The remains of the Third Corps were smashed into the Second Corps. And they didn't get too. Birney wasn't too enthused about that. Wasn't too enthused that he was stuck with Winfield Scott in the Second Corps, but he was willing to cooperate. What I'm trying to say is the force that Grant is pulling together to make this massive assault on the muleshoe is the best force you can pull together in spring of 1864 from this army. So all experienced leaders, all combat veterans, but they're about to see something that they had never seen before, at least in their time in the military. On the morning of May 12th, and I mean early morning, 4:35 a.m., 20,000 Union soldiers are going to pour out the tree line north of Johnson's Confederate division, charging toward the muleshoe. It is very much like Upton's attack 2 days prior. They are in column formations, just like the phalanx of ancient times. They're like javelins being thrown right toward the Union Confederate line, threatening to tear right through it. Now, Johnson was anticipating something to happen. I don't know if he anticipated something quite like this. 20,000 men moving all at the same time, running at the same time across the field, across a rain-soaked field. So you could probably imagine some of these guys are probably tripping and slipping as they're charging. Johnson had ordered his men to lay on their arms that night, so early morning when he starts seeing Hancock's men pouring out of the tree line, he orders for his men to get up. Here's the moment. Make ready, aim, fire. And instead of bang, 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 since all the powder was wet, you heard a line of pop, pop, pop along Johnson's front. The gunpowder failed to discharge due to it being too wet. Johnson's men are in big, big trouble. Hancock's leaded elements pour over the earthworks, dive into the trenches, and start rounding up thousands of Confederate soldiers. Very quickly, 2 Confederate generals, including Major General Johnson, are going to fall prisoner, along with 3,000 Confederate soldiers. 22 Confederate cannon are scooped up, and 30 stands of colors are captured. This is unprecedented. In mere minutes, the center of the Confederate line is gone, or at least seemingly gone. It's not we're falling back. It is we were there one moment and then got nuked by the Union Second Corps. Now, Grant's strategy was not just for Hancock to make the attack, because he saw what had happened to Upton. Upton lacked support, so he's going to try to make certain that Hancock gets necessary support. On the east side of the Muleshoe, Burnside is instructed to make a demonstration against the eastern side of the salient. On the west side of the Muleshoe, you're going to hopefully have the 6th Corps, who are now commanded by Horatio Wright, since Sedgwick is no more, try to attack on the west side. And if they can make a breakthrough, join Hancock's forces. Do you think that they're going to succeed? So, like always, the other corps commanders suffer from the slows. And unfortunately, there's going to be mistiming. The 6th Corps is not going to get in position early enough to really overwhelm Richard Ewell's Confederate Corps. Richard Ewell and Robert E. Lee are both going to ride up to the interior line. They're going to go riding up to John B. Gordon's division, who have, laid an interior line out a few days prior. And from a hilltop, they're going to be able to observe down into the Muleshoe what's unfolding. To Lee, the whole army has been defeated. There is a brief moment where Lee was definitely considered that this was the end of the Confederacy right then, right now, right in front of him. Richard Ewell, on the other hand, is freaking out. He is, basically telling Lee, I told you not to move the artillery. I told you not to move we just should have put the salient here. You were wrong this whole time. What were you doing? And I don't know quite exactly what Lee said to Ewell, but something was along the lines of, moment high. Calm down. Shouting up a storm is not going to drive the enemy out of our earthworks, now is it? Now, Lee, starts coordinating with Gordon, with Ewell, like, okay, get everybody together you can, stragglers that are broken away from the front lines, get them in line with Gordon's men, and we're going to start pushing back into the Muleshoe. And Lee, for the second time this week, looks ready to lead the whole army at the front. And just like that happened on May 6th in the Widow Tap Field, Gordon's men are going to start shouting, lead to the rear, please do not go lead us into this maelstrom. You're going to get murdered. If you go there, you're going to get killed, and this whole army is going to fall apart. And to continue especially, remember, Lee has lost 3 of his 4 corps commanders. I'm including the cavalry as a whole corps. Longstreet is gravely wounded. He's out. Hill is sick at this time. And Jeb Stuart is now dead. If Lee gets even just wounded in this engagement, what is going to happen to the leadership of the Army of North Virginia? By all intents and purposes, the American Civil War could have ended right here on this day, in my personal opinion. Okay, maybe not immediately on May 12th. I've had several days to try to wrap things up, but the defining moment could have been right here. In any case, Lee is going to, relinquish command over to Gordon. He's going to trust Gordon and Ewell to oversee the counterattack, and the counterattack will begin. Now, here are some images of what the Muleshoe looks like today. From the top, you're actually looking from the northwest side of the salient. You're looking more out toward where the 6th Corps is about to make their attack on this day on May 12th. Sorry, I'm kind of spoiling the story. So yeah, you're kind of looking out to where you'll see some reinforcements of the 6th Corps coming. Directly going north, if you look toward the tree line, you'd also would have had the 2nd Corps coming out and made their attack. Now, if we go down to the bottom image, we got the Union perspective coming out over this field. Now, it was nighttime when they made the assault, and it was also during a rainstorm they were making this assault. And well, since there was not a lot of Union cavalry at Spotsylvania, Hancock did not have time to properly do scouting of what lay ahead of his men. I think if they knew what lay ahead of them, they would have had far more apprehensions of making this assault. Because again, this is not just simple breastworks. These are intricate trenches they're about to storm. And in fact, when they first burst out of the woods, they come across what they claim is a farm lane, and they attack some Confederate soldiers there. And for a brief moment, elements of the 2nd Corps start cheering, "We did it! That was easier than we fought!" And then, of course, other guys go, "Oh, that was just the Confederate skirmishers." And then if you look at the bottom image, their head pans to that hilltop where the actual Muleshoe is, and they go, "Well, crap." And the main attack commenced. So here we are, reclaiming the Muleshoe. And remember, guys, we're only around, I'd say probably around, 6 a.m. by this point. You know, it's still, sun is just now starting to rise over the Spotsylvania battlefield. And this massive battle is well on its way. So, hey, right down there, Ewell froze a temper tantrum. Gordon's division rally stragglers, and how they're going to do the reclamation process. They're not just going to form a straight line and then try to push forward. They're going to try to work their way from the flanks of the salient and then work their way inward. Essentially, they're going to squeeze the life of the 2nd Corps, threatening to entrap them and compelling the Union soldiers to evacuate the land they had just captured. And there's going to be 2 North Carolinian brigades that are very important to do this. Off to the right, you're going to have the North Carolinian Brigade of General Lane. Off to the left, you're going to have the North Carolinian Brigade of General Daniel. And General Daniel is actually going to be mortally wounded in trying to rally his brigade to march up through the trenches to push the Union forces back. So you may even be able to make his name out in the left-hand corner of the Muleshoe over there. But they're going to start succeeding and reclaiming land, but it's a very, very costly affair. One person described that the whole counterattack by the Confederates moving through the Muleshoe, they basically were, as they made their way through, men were falling like the debris in the track of a storm. This is horrible conditions because now you have all these thousands of troops moving in and out between the Muleshoe, which is trenches. So the ground's already been dug up, which means it's become very, very wet from all the rain, all the mud everywhere. Now you're trying to march your way back through this. The 2nd Corps are not willing to give up what they had just captured. They had gone through too much in this war to let a war-ending attack slip through their fingers. So they're trying tenaciously to hold on to, and they're wondering, Hancock's wondering, where's my reinforcements? Again, the other forces have suffered from the slows. So Burnside's demonstrating on the east side of the salient, but he's kind of going, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to get my feet wet. I don't want to get my feet muddy. Horatio Wright is trying to get all of his men into column. And really, it ain't going to be until about 6, 7, 8 a.m. I'm throwing a bunch of hours out. That's very unprofessional of me. It's going to take a few extra hours until the 6th Corps arrive on the field. And when they do, they're going to indeed try to pour into the breach of the Muleshoe. But by that point, all but 400 yards of the salient have been recaptured by the Confederates. But there is a 150-yard long breach in the Confederate line that is still undecided. And it's through that narrow breach that elements of the 6th Corps are going to try to make their way through to support Hancock. And well, what follows is 22 hours of continuous fighting over this narrow strip of the Confederate Muleshoe, which will forever be renowned as the Bloody Angle. John Haley of the 17th Maine put it best the fighting in the Bloody Angle: a seething, bubbling, roaring hell of hate and murder. This is the most savage fighting of the American Civil War. I know that claim is thrown around a lot, including by myself, when we get into talking about historical locations from the war. When they're on site, you can really get into the emotions of the moment, and you want to hype up how important the events occurring on the property are. Of all the things I've read, the Bloody Angle fighting, it's almost undescribable of what's happening. These Union and Confederate soldiers refused to give up hold of a dirt and wooden wall. If the Union gives up, it means they lose a good chance at ending this war now. If the Confederates give up, it means the Union will surge back through the Muleshoe and, of course, charge right down to Richmond. Fighting is hand to hand. The bayonet is used freely. You're going to see all of these regiments charging to the wall, falling, dissolving as they get up on top of the earthwork. Occasionally, you'll have one of the flag bearers, in a last desperate hope to try to rally his regiment forward, will plant their shattered flags into the earthwork. Union and Confederate flags are stamped in the earthwork on both sides. I've read about the 1st South Carolina. Their flag bearer, after the staff was gone, essentially, had been shot through so many times, he decided, I can't hold it anymore, and just pounded it into the ground and be like, there, and nobody can take it now. The flag bearer of the 16th Mississippi was killed, and when he was killed, the flag left his hands precariously leaning against the trench. Therefore, the Confederate flag was flying over the earthwork, enticing Union soldiers to charge forward to try to grab it, a chance of glory. And of course, anytime any Union soldier poked their head up above the trenches, they were instantly shot. What you're going to see happening here, at one point, Hancock tries to organize 30 artillery pieces about 400 yards north of the Bloody Angle to try to support the attack with artillery fire. But most of the artillery crewmen were green. They had never been in battle before. They improperly timed their fuses. They were improperly gauging the gun. So a lot of these shells were flying harmlessly over the heads of the men inside the Bloody Angle, just adding to the cacophony of horror that's opening here. I saw one person describe, if I can find the terminology for it, because it's just horrifying. I don't think I'm going to find it. There was some term. It kind of set it home, the whole term they used. Give it a couple more seconds so I can find it. They basically described it as a place of skulls. One of the veterans described the Bloody Angle. This was just barbaric what was happening. And nobody was telling these guys to stop. That nobody was saying, nobody was telling the Union that, hey guys, that we've lost this battle, that they've reclaimed the Muleshoe. This is a lost cause. Nobody was going to argue with the Second Corps. Again, the Second Corps at this point were the veteran soldiers. They'd been through so much. They were not going to let this one slip through their fingers. And then you throw the 6th Corps in, who, after Upton's attack had failed due to lack of support, the 6th Corps were not willing to go down without a fight again. They were not going to let this another breach be lost. At one point, they get desperate. The Union roll up 2 artillery pieces, like they push it in the mud out of the tree line and push it right up onto the earthwork to try to train it down onto the Confederates and start firing canister shot at point blank range. Very quickly, though, the Confederates subdued the piece, and the Union artillerymen had to abandon it. So there's these 2 whole artillery pieces just sitting precariously on the muddy slopes of the Bloody Angle. Mix that in with all the flags that are falling around and sitting around, mix it in with all the soldiers that have fallen on either side. You probably couldn't even tell there was an earthwork there. It probably was just a pile of bodies and other sorts of accoutrements. And this is all happening during a rainstorm. All this is happening during a rainstorm, which is where I made a meme, a very cringy meme yesterday, where I went, what can be worse than fighting in a burning forest? To which Patrick goes, oh, I know. Fighting in a Bloody Angle. Because, yes, like I said, you fought the Overland Campaign, couldn't get worse after the Wilderness. It can always get worse. It can always get worse, guys. What am I doing? I'm losing my mind. I'm losing my mind. I'm talking so much. One more detail about the fight in the bloody angle as the fighting goes on throughout the day, and they're just running ammunition forward to keep firing away point blank range. There was so much musket balls and canister and shrapnel flying through the air at the bloody angle. It started to fall trees. A 22-inch diameter oak tree was keeled over by the fighting in the bloody angle. And if you see to the left, that is the stump of that oak tree preserved today at the Smithsonian. You can actually go and see it. There were at least two other large trees that were fallen. One of the trees actually crashed right on top of soldiers of the 1st South Carolina. Not the way they expected to go out, I'm sure. And when this is all done, it's estimated 3 acres of vegetation was wiped out from so much lead and iron flying through the air. Now, the whole reason Lee is throwing all these men into the bloody angle is because he's trying to buy time so the rest of Ewell's corps and reinforcements from Anderson and Ewell's, the survivor, let's just call them the survivors at this rate. The survivors of the Mule Shoe can go back there, get reinforced by Anderson and Early, and start digging a new trench line, start digging new earthworks, new defenses that they can fall back upon. So they're trying, these guys that are being thrown forward, these North Carolinians, these Georgians, these Virginians, these guys are all being sacrificed to buy time for Lee to build a new defensive line. And it does work at a very costly affair. By 2 a.m. on May 13th, as I mentioned, after 23 hours of continuous fighting at the bloody angle, Lee is going to send word to the men up in the Mule Shoe that you can withdraw from the salient. We got a new line waiting for you. It'll be around 4 a.m. when the Union soldiers on top of the bloody angle receive word, okay, Lee's gone, fall back. We're done. We're done here. Fall back. In total, 17,000 combined casualties were suffered from this one attack. This is one of the deadliest attacks to ever occur during the American Civil War. This was war on a scale none of these men had ever seen before. Like I mentioned, these tactics, these phalanx tactics, they're nothing new. These charging in sharp columns, this had been done in ancient times. This is just being brought into the modern era. I hate the word modern. And the bloody angle is going to basically set the tempo and make everybody realize we cannot win this in one major battle. Come on. You know, the Second Corps is like devastated after this. I feel the Second Corps gave their all in this one attack, and the Second Corps is never going to fully recover from the fighting at the bloody angle and in the Mule Shoe. It's like all the last energy they had from all the years of fighting was exhausted. They thought they were finally going to achieve victory, that they saw the end of the tunnel, and then they realized there was many more battles awaiting, and they probably didn't have the stomach for it anymore. So that's depressing. So what's Grant going to do after he's unsuccessful in breaching the Mule Shoe? Well, for the next several days, the rain continues, and Grant decides he's not going to try to assault again in the rain. It's just going to make things worse. He's going to start considering pivoting his course once more. So we've already been talking today about, how the Second Corps went from the western end of the Union line over to the eastern end of the Union line so they can attack the Mule Shoe. Well, now he's thinking about moving the 6th Corps and the 5th Corps and putting them on the new left flank of the Union line. So he keeps pivoting all of his troops around Spotsylvania Courthouse, trying to find a weak spot. He's trying to see if he's overstretched Lee's line because he knows that he outnumbers Lee 2-1 in this situation. So he's like, surely there got to be an opening in his line. But anywhere Grant deploys, Lee's going to deploy his troops also to meet him. The weather's finally going to break on May 17th, and Grant decides the following day he is going to make one more attack on the Mule Shoe. just to be sure. He's like, I've noticed Lee is starting to move most of his men into new lines immediately east and south of Spotsylvania. Maybe that means Richard Ewell has abandoned the Muleshoe. Spoiler alert, Ewell has not abandoned the Muleshoe yet. Now, Ewell is not the center of the Confederate line, as you can see anymore. He is now the west flank of the Confederate line. He is not giving up the new trenches that they worked on, that they've spent so many lives trying to build. This is that new defensive line. They spent all day trying to delay Hancock so Lee's men can build these new earthworks. So while the 5th and 6th Corps redeployed to the east, Lee's going to extend his line down to the Po River south of Spotsylvania Courthouse. The 2nd Corps is going to attack once more the Muleshoe. They're able to get up to the old Muleshoe line, but once they get there, they see the new Confederate line, and they're immediately pounded upon by Confederate small arms fire and artillery fire. And Hancock and Grant both agreed this is not worth going through again, and they withdraw. Now, since Grant is starting to move all of his army east of Spotsylvania, Lee is curious as to what Grant's going to do next. Where is he going to move? He's in a pretty tight spot right now, a very narrow window between the Confederate line and the Rappahannock River. So Lee's still thinking maybe Grant's going to withdraw to Fredericksburg still. After the Muleshoe, that had to sour Grant. That was horrible fighting even for my standards. Surely Grant has second thoughts after what we went through at the Muleshoe and at the Bloody Angle. So on May 19th, Lee is going to detach what's left of Ewell's corps. By the way, standard number for, corps, and it depends on the fighting force, could be anywhere from 10 to 20,000, give or take. Ewell has less than 8,000 men in his corps right now. They're so badly mauled from the Bloody Angle fighting. So Ewell's corps are going to move out of the Muleshoe. They're going to move to the east end of the battlefield, move over to where Early and Anderson are. And he is going to start poking and prodding around the Fredericksburg Road. Now, the Fredericksburg Road has been the scene of some fighting already. Back on May 10th, and the power twitched. Oh, great. The power's twitching. Hold, power. Please hold for me, power. I'm almost done with my story. So, on May 10th, when Upton had made his attack, I mentioned Burnside was also supposed to support from the east side. Here's the thing about Burnside. On May the 10th, it wasn't that he had the slows. He moved uncharacteristically too fast. He started wheeling the whole 9th Corps, pivoted with his left flank on the Po River. He basically, was it the Po River or the Fredericksburg Road? He had his left flank anchored on something. Might have been the Fredericksburg Road, actually. Sorry, guys, I'm getting confused. I got a little startled. The lights were twitching. And he starts moving like a door towards Spotsylvania Courthouse, the actual community. And he actually gets his troops right up against the village outskirts. But Grant fears that, oh goodness, Burnside's moved too quickly. Now his right flank's exposed to the Confederate battle line. I need to pull him back. So the reason Burnside wasn't able to support Upton that day, wasn't able to apply pressure to constract the Confederates, is kind of Grant's own doing, actually. So Burnside had already fought there on May 10th. Lee is now sending Ewell's corps up the Fredericksburg Road to investigate what's happening, and he's going to come across elements of the Union's 2nd Corps. And Ewell's men got to go, oh my God, these guys just keep showing up everywhere. They just, one moment they're on the west side, one moment they're in our center, now they're on our right flank. What the heck? What type of potion does Hancock and his 2nd Corps have? Teleportation potion? Can we have some of that stuff, please? Maybe Ewell wasn't thinking that exactly, but he did throw a temper tantrum during the Bloody Angle incident. Well, one thing's curious. These are 2nd Corps troops. They're not the veterans. In fact, these are soldiers that Ewell's Corps have never seen on a battlefield before. So remember how I mentioned at the end of the Wilderness video and the start of this live stream, how Grant was going to get reinforcements from the garrisons and cities and Union cities? We call these heavy artillery units, or heavies for short. They spent the first couple years in the war either doing parade duty, doing guard duty for politicians or sitting around in fortifications around cities, not doing a whole lot except going for the manual of arms. And some of these guys really, really wanted to go out to the field. I mean, after years of fighting, they were really, these guys still had the old mentality of the glory of warfare. They had not seen too much of the horrors that the Army of the Potomac had been witnessing for 3 years now. So by 1864, they're going, when do we get to go? Oh, these guys are getting the glory. They're going to go fight at Gettysburg and everything. When do we get to go? Well, guess what, heavies? Today is your day. You get to join the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. What can go wrong? So Ewell's force started moving toward these Union troops. The Union troops are located on a place known as Harris Farm. Ewell smashes into these heavies. The heavies are startled, but do give stubborn resistance to Ewell. They'll lose heavy losses, but they'll give stubborn resistance to the Confederates in their first battle. And then Ewell turns to his left and starts noticing the rest of Hancock's corps coming down to reinforce the heavies and goes, oh, I don't want to be here. I do not want to fight Hancock anymore. I'm going home, guys. I'm done. So that was I'm really abbreviating the Battle of Harris Farm, by the way. This is a highly overlooked aspect of the Spotsylvania battle, and there's a reason for it. See all the stuff we got to talk about tonight? People get a little exhausted once we get to May 19th, including myself. So Harris Farm kind of gets overlooked. But in short, Ewell went out to scout to see what Grant was doing. Was he withdrawing to Fredericksburg? Was he planning to move south again? Collides right into the Second Corps, including some new soldiers in the Second Corps, part of the heavy artillery regiments, who are now infantry. They're not shooting guns anymore. They still call them heavy artillery, but they're actually infantry now. And decides, yeah, I'm done fighting here. I've had enough bloodshed over these past couple weeks, and falls back to the earthworks. And that, folks, is effectively the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. 2 weeks of some of the most savage fighting in the American Civil War. And this photograph actually comes from Harris Farm and shows members of the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery Regiment burying Confederate dead. Oddly enough, Harris Farm, which is always overlooked, even when we're talking about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, because the focus is justifiably on the bloody angle. Actually, a good portion of battlefield dead photographs from the American Civil War, they come from the Harris Farm. So if you've ever seen some photographs of dead soldiers from the American Civil War, chances are it's photographs of those folks that the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery are burying in that photograph. This interesting detail. But in any case, the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse has come to an end by May 21st, 1864. The Union have suffered over 2,000 deaths, over 13,000 have been wounded, and over 2,000 are missing. As for the Confederates, they've lost 1,500 soldiers killed, over 5,000 are wounded, but over 5,000 more are missing. And this is where we get into the differences and when we measure casualties from the American Civil War, what it means. We can throw you the numerical losses, which is 18,399 losses suffered by the Union, and the Confederates suffered 12,687 losses. I should also mention these are the numbers that are thrown out by the American Battlefield Trust. There are dispute over the losses. That'll be with any battle. But notice when we do the mathematics and we break it down with divisions, we get a bit of a different story. Though numerically the Union have once more suffered more losses, in terms of the casualty rate or the casualty percentage, the Confederates have suffered higher. 24% losses compared to 18% losses. And let's keep in mind, when the Army of North Virginia incurs losses, they're not going to be able to replace them. And from the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, and more so the surrounding fighting that was occurring down around Richmond at this time, Lee has lost Jeb Stuart. He's lost one of he's lost his corps cavalry commander. Longstreet is still out for several more months. He will not come back until next year, really. Hill is going to recover, and we'll be talking about AP Hill again in future streams. So he comes back into rank. He takes back charge of the Confederate Third Corps, but Ewell's corps, the old corps of Thomas Stonewall Jackson, is completely mauled. What I think is really interesting about Spotsylvania, this was the end of the old guard. of the American Civil War. Old Guard has been your main units that fought for years, your ways that you were fought about fighting, the tradition, the norms, the standards, the tactics, they were all gradually changing from the very start of the American Civil War. But this is a very defiant image to show, comparing this back to First Manassas, how different the war has changed over those years. And it's interesting to note that during the Bloody Angle assault, you had arguably the two best portions of each side's army thrown each other into a maelstrom. The Union Army Second Corps, the Confederate Army Second Corps. The Confederate Army Second Corps was Stonewall Jackson's former corps, the one that made the flanking attack back in Chancellorsville the year prior. And Ewell's Corps and Hancock's Corps are not going to be the same ever again. They're just not going to have the endurance they once had after the Bloody Angle incident. On May 21st, as I mentioned, Spotsylvania is officially a stalemate. Nobody's really gaining an advantage outside of Spotsylvania Courthouse. Lee has succeeded in blocking an easy approach for the Union to take toward Richmond, but Grant has a narrow avenue between the Confederate lines and the Rappahannock River to continue slipping to the southeast. And Grant decides to continue the offensive. I think nobody's surprised there. After 2 weeks of this, Grant is like, I'm not letting these losses go in vain. We must keep going forward. We must end this war. And Lee is going to be forced to evacuate his entrenchments around Spotsylvania Courthouse and fall back to the North Anna River, where Lee is going to try to set up a trap for Grant. We'll talk more about that in a future stream. But before we wrap up tonight's live stream, I want to mention about this image here. This is a photograph taken at Massaponax Church. Massaponax Church is located a few miles south of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And at Massaponax Church on May 21st, Ulysses S. Grant is going to call a council of war together. So all of his commanding officers are going to gather and basically debate what's our next course of strategy. While they're having this meeting in the pews they took out of the church and are sitting out in the courtyard, one of the Civil War photographers is going to head up. I think it was Alexander Gardner. Heads up. He's going to get into the window. He's going to narrow down, and he's going to take 3 images of this Council of War in action. So you're seeing an actual you're seeing the very Council of War I am talking about unfolding. A few years earlier, you will not have this type of documentation. But thanks to advancements in photography, we can now see an actual moment in history being depicted, what it really looked like. Here it is, the Council of War on May 21st. The gentleman leaning over the one pew that's hunched over somebody's shoulder, that gentleman standing is Ulysses S. Grant. He is leaning over the shoulder of George Gordon Meade. They're looking at maps, freshly drawn, most likely of Lee's entrenchments around Spotsylvania Courthouse, and deciding how they're going to get around it to the south. So, crazy image to look at. May not look like much, but once you realize the story behind it, that you're seeing Grant actually planning out his campaign, is one of the most fascinating images of the American Civil War. And this is not the full image. If I cropped it out to show Grant and Meade. The full image also shows wagons of the 5th Corps going down a road network, going down, supplying the army. So it's crazy. It's cool images. The Library of Congress preserves them. Just go type out Massaponax. Massaponax. I keep wanting to say Appomattox. Massaponax Church. I'm gonna double check that. Is that the right spelling? Massaponax Church. Yep, Massaponax Church. Go check these images out. I'm gonna go see if I can actually get a link for the image, because you got to see it to believe it type deal. Timothy O'Sullivan's actually was credited to it. Who was he still working? I think he was still working with Gardner's studio at this point. So I was technically right. I'm a nerd when it comes to American Civil War photography, so Okay, I'm trying to get you guys like a link to it. Here we are. All right, here we are. Let's go over to the Library of Congress. All right, I can copy that. All right, there's a link in the description below, or in the chat below, if you want to go see the photographs yourself and all of their wonderful detail. And I do encourage you go see this photograph of Massaponax Church and all its wonderful detail. The Library of Congress preserves most of the photographs taken during the American Civil War, particularly the collections of Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner. All of them are preserved. And something to keep in mind about these photographs, they're not taken on like a film reel like we're used to. And well, now we don't even do that. We do digital. These were basically images burned by the sun, by sunlight, right onto a glass plate. And the film was actually a chemical composition that was poured across the grain, across the glass grain. Therefore, Civil War images have some of the highest depth of quality you'll ever find. You can zoom right into the images and have perfectly clear details. No grain, no fuzziness. So go check these images out with that Library of Congress link. You can zoom in detail, see the faces of all these men, what they're wearing, what's going on behind the scenes. It's a blast. Or it's a blast just for me because I'm a nerd. I'm a guy dressed in wool from the 19th century in my 21st century bedroom talking about a battle that most Americans have no idea about. I'm a nerd. And that's going to wind down our stream. But before we wrap up, I want to check out that poll we threw out to you guys. And for those that are, by the way, if you do want to go the extra mile and support in this channel, we do have a Ko-fi page. Link is in the description below. When you do support the Ko-fi page, you will get access to select scripts and notes from videos and live streams, included in notes to tonight's stream. So since I know I can talk a lot of gibberish and I can get tongue twisted very easily, and that happened today in the stream, and I apologize, you can go down to Ko-fi. If you become a member of the Garrison, our membership program, you get access to tonight's notes. You can learn all the appropriate details about what happened during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And before we depart tonight, be sure to hit the like button. Hit the like button down below. When you do that, you let the TubeView algorithm know that historical content is important, that you do want to use social media to get edumacated. So be sure to do that. As the lights keep twitching, what is happening? Stop doing that. Apologies, guys. I am having technical issues. The lights are twitching. I'm going to have to probably wrap this up very soon, a bit prematurely. I'm trying to end my poll. Everything's going haywire. The lights twitch. Now everything's going haywire. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I'm trying to get there. Okay. We ended the poll. We're split down the middle, 50-50. So half of us in the chat say that Grant made the right move with detaching Sheridan, and half did not. And I think there's arguments to be made on both sides about it. So I'm surprised it was right down the middle. But on the other hand, I feel it's kind of right. It was a very controversial move for Grant to make, to split off Sheridan. But it ended up leading to the death of Jeb Stuart, which was a major morale crusher for the Confederacy. And also, it's also going to cause more confusion and more stress for Robert E. Lee. It's going to make it a bit more difficult for him to take charge of the army at the front thereafter. All right. My whole stream is just all over the place. Like there's like chats not appearing on my one chat. It's so weird. So yeah, we probably should wrap this up before the gods try to smite me. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this installment of our coverage of the Overland Campaign 160th anniversary. There will be more live streams in the future. Of course, we got Lee's Trap at the North Anna River. And of course, we got the Battle of Cold Harbor to talk about once we get to June. So thank you guys for tuning in. I do not have my outro pulled up. So what we're going to do, I think we're just going to play a good old-fashioned, bayonet, and then we're going to be on our way out. Thank you guys for tuning in. Bayonet!